On today's episode, we take a deep dive into one of my favorite old school lures that's still made today. It's a lure I think everybody should have at least one of, so we talk about its key features and where it shines. We also take a look at some new faces on the pro circuits for the 2024 fishing season and who's leaving, and we open up the mailbag to talk about weightless wacky rigs, dry suits, and rods and reels for lighter lures. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk podcast. As always, we are brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors, and it is the best time of year to buy your gear from ALF because it's Black Friday time. They released their sales for Black Friday almost a month early, so you can go on the website, you can take advantage of them right now through November 27th. They've got Daiwa Secret sales going on. They have 25% off St. Croix in the form of a rebate, 20 to 25% off used gear, 25% off Abu Garcia, 10% off Garmin, 20% off Spro, 25% off Berkeley, 20% off Beast Coast, 25% off Arc fishing rods, 20% off everything 6 cents, 30% off 13 fishing rods and reels, 30% off Sunline, 30% off Seaguar, 25% off Select Lures, 30% off Bahio sunglasses, 30% off Waterland. They've got 25% off Plano Edge storage boxes and a ton more. And that's not everything. Check back the week of Thanksgiving. So this week, if you're listening on Tuesday, check back like Thursday or Friday of this week because they have doorbusters coming up that aren't even listed on the website yet that I promise you're going to want to take a look at. So head over to www.americanlegacyfishing.com. And as always, if whatever you're looking for is not on sale, use code TACKLETALK10. That gets you 10% off your entire order every single time. Some exclusions apply, but not many. Almost everything on that website is 10% off if it's regularly priced over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com with code TACKLETALK10. All right, folks, today we're going to start with some pro fishing news. And the very first bit of news we have here, it's been like a week or so since this has come out, so you may have already seen it, but they've started releasing the rosters and the final lineups, I guess, for both the Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour, and then the Elite Series has kind of been figured out for a while now, too. So I don't think we've actually talked about who's in and who's out yet, so we're going to do that right now. So let's start with the Bassmaster Elite Series. They have these things called Legends Exemptions. I'm not 100% sure how they work, but basically I think if you're anyone who's like won a Bassmaster Classic in the past, you get this Legends exemption that you can use to earn a spot on the Elite Series without having to go back and qualify through the Bassmaster Open. So you get to kind of jump the line and not have to go and fish all, whatever it is, 9 of the Opens EQ tournaments next year. So this past year, Larry Nixon, the general himself, used his exemption and hopped back on the Elite Series. But as of last week, Larry announced that he's retiring. So the general, Larry Nixon, one of the best to ever do it, won't be on the Elite Series next year. And a side note, I guess they scared me. Like Bassmaster posted this black and white photo of Larry with the caption that just said Bassmaster legend Larry, the General Nixon, and then it was like the ... click here to read more because that's where the caption cut off. And I thought the same thing that everybody else thinks when you see like a somber black and white photo of someone who's, getting up there in age. My heart dropped. I thought Larry Nixon like passed away or something. Thank God that's not the case. Larry's just hanging it up from competitive fishing in general. So he's had an amazing career. He was Bassmaster's first $1 million man back in 1992. He won 14 BASS tournaments, including the 1983 Bassmaster Classic right here in my backyard in Cincinnati at the Ohio River. And Larry had this to say about his upcoming retirement. He said, "The Elite Series grind is more than most people could ever imagine. The elements of professional bass fishing are some of the toughest things in all of sports. Over the course of my career, I've worn out 2 thumbs, a shoulder, a heart, a knee, and an elbow due to competitive repetitive repetition. My health is okay, but believe me, everything is just worn out. It's become really difficult to do normal things like tie knots and other little things. There is absolutely nothing in this world that I would trade for my career in professional bass fishing tournaments. The entire journey, from being in Bassmaster Magazine for exposure to being on television on TNN to where the sport is today, has been truly amazing. So there you go. Straight from the general himself, we wish Larry nothing but the best in his retirement. And who knows, maybe we'll get him on an episode someday now that he's retired in the future. I think that would be awesome. He's had like 4 or 5 decades of fishing knowledge that I'm sure would be a ton of fun to tap into. So hopefully we'll get Larry on here pretty soon. But Larry retiring means that there's an open spot in the Elite Series for someone else to use their Legends exemption. So we were all sitting here thinking, who's it going to be, right? As soon as the announcement comes out that Larry is gone, that means that there is that spot and someone could come in. Basically, someone that's won a Bassmaster Classic before. Would it be Cliff Pace? Would it be Takahiro Omori? Like, there's all kinds of people that could be in that spot. But next year, 2024, the Elite Series Legend exemption is being used by none other than Jordan Lee. So the back-to-back Bassmaster Classic champion, the phenom Jordan Lee, will be leaving Major League Fishing and heading back to the Bassmaster Elite Series, where he will undoubtedly be a force to be reckoned with right from the start. So if you like competitive fishing, this should excite you, because we have someone stepping back into the Elite Series with their Legends exemption that will compete from day one and will compete for years and years and years to come, versus somebody who sometimes the Legends exemption is like someone who's a little bit older, just coming back in for like nostalgia or name recognition's sake, or just kind of wanting to get back in the swing of things for a year or two. This isn't that case. So kudos to Jordan. He's going to jump right back in the Elite Series next year. Guarantee he's going to be a force to be reckoned with and someone that you're going to want to watch. So other than that, you did have Major League Fishing officially announce their 2024 Bass Pro Tour roster. And aside from a few that we knew about, Jordan Lee obviously being one of them, leaving to go back to Bass, Kevin Van Dam retiring, we did have some others that were absent from that list, meaning that for one reason or another, they either left, they didn't requalify, they weren't invited back, whatever. Not sure what some of these people's situation is, but we do have some notable names that are missing from the Bass Pro Tour roster next year. Those names are Tommy Biffle, Josh Butler, Mitch Crane, Roy Hawk, Brett Hite, Timmy Horton, Jeff Crete, Jordan Lee, obviously, Cliff Pace, Randall Tharp, and then, of course, Kevin Van Dam. So there's some big names there that I didn't see coming or I didn't know about. Randall Tharp, Timmy Horton, Brett Hite, Tommy Biffle. Those are names that people are going to recognize that are no longer on the Bass Pro Tour in the Major League Fishing side of things for next year. Now, they do have to kind of make room, too, because they have new guys coming up through the Tackle Warehouse Invitationals that have qualified. So I do know you have to clear some room there. Those new people that are coming in from the Tackle Warehouse Invitationals are Keith Carson, Gray Buck, Justin Cooper, Drew Gill, Nick Hatfield, Corey Schrumpf, Matt Steffen, Jason Vance, Martin Villa, or Villa, I'm not quite sure how to say that, and then Josh Weaver. And then switching gears and going back to the Bassmaster Elite Series, there are 9 new anglers that qualified through the Bassmaster Opens for next year on the Elite Series, and they will be joining Jordan Lee as the new faces of Bassmaster. So you have JT Tompkins, John Garrett, Trey McKinney, Robert Gee, Tyler Williams, Wesley Gore, Logan Parks, Ben Milliken, and Kyle Patrick. Those are going to be your fresh faces on the Bassmaster Elite Series for 2024. So I think that's everything. I think that catches you guys up pretty well on the pro side of things heading into 2024. And then barring anything crazy happening, there probably won't be too much pro fishing talk on our episodes going forward through the rest of the year, unless, again, something crazy happens, because they've already announced where they're going, who's fishing, everything's kind of out there in the ether for 2024. All right, everybody. The next thing we're going to get to here, we're going to spend some time talking about something that we don't talk about very often, but I think it's something that we should today, and it's specifically an old school, and I'm saying that with quotation marks here, an old school type of bait. And I'm going to call it old school because these baits really had their heyday, I would say, in, the late 80s and into the 90s. And that bait is none other than the Smithwick Rattlin' Rogue. So the Rogue is made by a great company in Smithwick that 1000% does not get the love that it should in today's bass fishing world. But today, hopefully we're going to give Smithwick the love that they deserve, because these are baits that I've used for years and years and have really performed well for me, and I think deserve a place in most people's tackle box. So the Smithwick Rogue is first and foremost a jerkbait. And it was one of the original jerkbaits to get released back in the day. And I've read a bunch of old stuff about Smithwicks, about the origins of today's jerkbaits and how these kind of came into the market. And if you go way back to like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were like floating Rapalas. But then most of these stories start off around like the 80s when you had people like Jimmy Crisp from Missouri, who was winning the Bassmaster events and the Western Bass Invitationals, I think, and all of that with probably at the time, I would guess, like a Magnum floating Rapala, but he was fishing it more aggressively and he was jerking it, which at the time, I think I read an article from Terry Battisti where he said they used to call it crispin after Jimmy Crisp. Obviously, that was the technique. Like, it wasn't jerk baiting, it was crispin, and crispin really started to take off. And then you can fast forward, the world starts to change, people get hip to crispin or whatever you want to call it, and then we're in this sort of like new age where people are now actually jerk baiting, and there's specialty rods, specialty lines, jerk baits actually start to suspend versus just float, and then you've opened up Pandora's box and jerk baits start to take over. And one of the first and best anglers on the planet to win tournament after tournament and cash check after check with a more traditional jerk bait way back in the day was none other than Gary Dobbins. And then over the years, there were people that helped make it more of like a household name. I would say Skeet Reese is probably in there. KVD is definitely in there if you want to talk about like these newer age guys that really took the jerkbait to like the next level to the regular anglers at home. But if we back up to someone like Gary Dobbins, who was one of the first people, again, out on this tournament trail to really get hip to this type of thing and take everybody's money doing it, what jerkbait was he throwing back then that really helped him kind of spread and pioneer this technique of jerkbaiting? Gary has said that back in the day, he was throwing this lure from Smithwick that they called the Rogue. And it was the Rattling Rogue back then, became a sensation. Dudes were buying them by the hundreds, sometimes not even fully assembled. Like they would just get like the bodies, I think, and they would put the lips and the hooks and the hardware and stuff in them themselves. It was just a time and place where you could not get your hands on too many Smithwick Rogues if you knew about them. So that leads us to the bait itself today. Smithwick largely kept their formula of these baits very similar with some minor changes over time. Sure, they've got like different sizes now, different weights, diving depths, but a Smithwick Rogue is still a Smithwick Rogue. And we will get right back to the Smithwick Rogue talk here in just a second, but first, we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. My batteries get abused. You've heard me talk about it the past few weeks, whether it's falling off the tailgate, falling down a hill, falling into the water. I'm not easy on my gear, which is why when I'm looking for my gear, I want something that is durable and dependable. That is like almost number one on my list of things that I need because I'm so hard on my gear. And that in and of itself is why I trust Dakota Lithium Batteries. I know that no matter what I do to these poor things, whatever they fall on, whatever happens, right, they can put up with my abuse and they're going to start what I need them to start. They're going to run as long as I need them to run. They're going to charge fast. They're going to be light. That's why I love my Dakota Lithiums. They've taken all of the variables out of batteries for me, and I just know that when I put that battery in my kayak or in my truck or do whatever, it's going to perform like it's supposed to perform. Dakota Lithium batteries are the number one lithium battery on the market for a reason. They're twice the power of traditional batteries. They're half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster, last up to 4 times longer, 100% US-based customer support, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty. So if you want the best batteries in the business and you want to save money, I've got you covered. You can head over to www.dakotalithium.com. Use code TACKLETALK10. All one word, TACKLETALK10 saves you 10% off your entire purchase over at Dakota Lithium. Whatever batteries you need, 10% off with code TACKLETALK10 over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. All right, let's get back to Smithwicks here. My go-to in the Smithwick family is the Smithwick Suspending Rattling Rogue. It's 4.5 inches long, 3/8 ounce in weight. It comes with size 6 hooks, I believe, on it, and it dives up to 6 feet. There are other ones in the Rogue family. You have the Pro Rogue, the Elite 8, and the Perfect 10, I think are what they call their deep divers now. They have the Floating Rogues, but regular old Smithwick Rattling Rogues, the suspending models, are my go-to in the Smithwick family. They're widely available almost anywhere you buy lures. They're very inexpensive too, which is maybe my favorite part about it. In today's standards and jerkbaits, you've got these, $9, $10, $15, $17, $25 jerkbaits. Smithwick Rogues are usually like $7.99. So a very affordable jerkbait by today's standards. Now, when you look at this bait out of the box, it does look old school. It looks like something that you might find in your grandpa's old tackle box that you inherit. Or honestly, I mean, you probably will find them in your grandpa's old tackle box, but that's part of its charm. They haven't changed a whole lot. It's still that old school fish catching machine that it's always been. So the first thing you're going to notice right out of the box here is that the outside of the Rattlin' Rogue, and most of them, I think some of the colors might not be, but the majority of colors, definitely the ones I'm going to recommend to you today, are textured on the outside. So at first glance, it looks like this bait is dimpled, almost like a golf ball or something, like that kind of pattern to it, like a hammered, kind of studded look to it. But that's not really the case. When you look really closely at it, it's just that like the paint job and the actual plastic mold has raised scale patterns on it. So you run your finger over the side of it and it's rough because it's got raised scales. It's not just painted scales on there. It's actually like in the mold, in the injection mold or whatever they use to make these things, there is a raised scale pattern. And it feels weird. It looks a little weird, but that raised pattern serves a very important purpose. That raised scale pattern creates this like multi-directional shimmer off the side of this bait that just makes sure that it's flat out seen from farther away than almost any other jerkbait that I use, especially when you pair it with any little bit of like sunlight or light from the surface with one of those metallic paint jobs that they have. That's where you get this really cool shine and shimmer off this bait. So I know it looks a little weird on the outside in the world where we're used to today of like smooth 110 style jerkbaits with flat and matte finishes all the time. This is in a completely different class in terms of visibility under the water. So some other key features of the Rogue are it's got painted on eyes, no actual glued on eyes or acrylic eyes. These are just painted yellow eyes with like black pupils on them usually. They have a very plain straight bill on the front, 3 trebles down the length of the bait, and a very distinct rattle. And aside from the textured body, I think the rattle really is the next and the other big feature of a Rogue that we'll touch on. When you pick up a Rattlin' Rogue and you shake it, you'll notice right away that it is a very distinct rattle. It's, I don't want to call it thin because it's not subtle, but I guess I will. I'll call it like a thin, resonating rattle. So if you ever cut a Rogue open and you look inside, you're going to tell that there are multiple little BBs or little smaller rattles inside this bait that all clink together, where nowadays you see a lot of these baits with these harsher, thuddier rattles in them, like the one knockers or 2 large, big rattles, whether they're tungsten or lead or whatever inside. This rattle isn't as harsh as most of those other rattles are today. And I don't know, I guess the way I'll describe it, I know this is not what's inside of it, but this to me is what it sounds like. It sounds like when you shake this bait, there's a bunch of metal grains of rice in it versus like big circles or big knockers like you normally see in some other jerkbaits. So that loud, thin rattle is a distinctive feature on the Rogue that I do like. The last thing feature-wise I think we'll probably talk about here, I guess, is the paint jobs, because there are like 18 different paint options in the Smithwick Rattlin' Rogue, but if you look at all of those 18, you're going to notice, again, very old-school paint colors. Like almost every one of them is what I would probably call like a lateral paint scheme, meaning that you're looking at this bait from the side, there might be a main body color, and then there might be a different color on the belly and on the back. Like those are where you're usually going to see the differentiating colors on a Smithwick Rogue. So aside from something like, I think they call their Fire Tiger Roan or something like that, but the Fire Tiger pattern that almost everybody has where you got the little black squigglies on it, other than that, almost every one of these baits just has like a base coat and then 1 or 2 accent colors on either the top or bottom or both, maybe a quick spray on the head. But again, even like on the top and the bottom of these baits, it's not these nice designs with like hard cutoff lines or, you know, they were using stencils or whatever. It's just like, oh, this is a silver bait. I'm going to make 1 sweep around the back with black, or I'm going to make 1 sweep under the belly with red or something like that. And that's it. So again, very simple old school type paint jobs. But of those 18 different colors, I really think there's only 4 that you need in your box. The first is the OG. It's the color that I think took the country by storm back when these were all the rage, and it's called Clown. The Clown Smithwick Rogue is basically just a silver body with gold spray all down the top of it, and then a quick sprayed red head. That's it. Just red head, gold back, and it kills in cold water. The next color that you need to know about is called Purple Darter. And Purple Darter is like I'll call it like a natural silver belly with just loud chartreuse down the sides of them. It's got a single shad dot on either side, and then the back, or the top, I guess if you want to call it, is purple. And that color, for whatever darn reason, has destroyed for me in moving waters. So rivers, dams, I don't know if it's just because smallmouth like chartreuse and that's a thing, if it's a confidence thing, I don't know, but purple darter for me is a must-have in my box of Smithwicks. And then the last two colors, if I was just going to buy one color, it would be one of these two. The first one, honestly, probably is my like gun to my head first color that I would buy. The first color is going to be the chrome black back orange belly. That, to me, I think is the greatest Smithwick Rogue color of all time. It's natural. It's got that black top for contrast. And then I don't know what it is about these, but there is something about that orange belly on a Smithwick Rogue that gets bit. I really wish I knew why. The orange to me has always mattered. I always get more bites with an orange belly Smithwick Rogue than I do with like a more natural, like a silver belly or something. So I wish I could sit here and say, well, the orange mimics the natural hue of a shad belly when the light's hitting the iridescent scale pattern from a certain thing or whatever it is, but I honestly have no clue. All I know, orange to me matters on Smithwick Rogues. That's my super scientific, super factual statement here that just is coming from me and years of using these things and having no idea why. Orange bellies on Smithwicks, to me, are a big deal. The other color, and the color that if I was going to get a second color, just so you have kind of a little bit of difference here, I would probably go with a chrome blue back orange belly. Same exact thing as the bait we just talked about, except instead of black on the back, it's got blue on the back. That's it. And I tend to throw like the black back on sunny days and then the blue back on cloudy days. Not to say I don't mix it up, but that seems to be how I gravitate toward. Again, both of them have that Smithwick orange belly. So those are your four colors, I think. Clown, purple darter, chrome blackback orange belly, and chrome blueback orange belly. Those are the four colors. I don't think you can go wrong with any of those. So then when we get to actually fishing this jerkbait itself, how does it respond and where does it shine? So if we want to zoom out, I guess, and take a look at this more of like a macro level, I think one of the big reasons a Smithwick Rogue doesn't get the love that it should is because it's kind of got the reputation over the years as a walleye bait. So, and that's true, right? A Smithwick Rogue absolutely smokes walleye, smokes sawguy, but above all else, it is still a bass lure. So with that in mind, I think when you're fishing any situation where both are viable catches, so if you've got both bass and walleye, then a Smithwick Rogue is obviously a no-brainer. For instance, like late fall and winter around here, we go from solely targeting bass to more of like a any fish bites type mindset. So when we go to the river, we start catching mixed bags of smallmouth and sawguy around here. Or if we go to the lakes, it's like half largemouth, half walleye bite. So when I'm dealing with a mixed bag lake or I'm just going out and trying to fish for fish in general, a Rogue is a stone cold killer. Smallmouth love it, largemouth love it, walleye love it, and sawguy love it. But even if you're in a place where walleye or sawguy or sauger or whatever toothy little member of that family you don't have around you is not in the cards, don't sweat it, because we're here to primarily talk about this as a bass bait with the Smithwick Rogue. So let's start with when the Rogue shines over other jerk baits on the market. To me, the role my Smithwick Rogue fills in my tackle box is very similar to that of like a Rapala Husky jerk. It's beefier, it's less subtle, it's less finessey in the jerkbait family. This is like a power jerkbait to me, if that's even a thing. That's what I'm going to call it, I guess, power jerk baiting, because the Smithwick Rogue does not turn on a dime. It doesn't completely stop on a dime. It's not a Megabass Vision 110 or a Jackal Re-Range. It's just not. And if you want it to be one of those, you're going to be disappointed. It's apples to oranges. To me, the Smithwick Rogue only does better than something like a 110 style jerkbait in very select situations. So those situations around here anyway, cold water and current are two of the main places that I like to throw a Smithwick Rogue. Cold, moving water. When you have both of those together, it's Rogue time, which means this is like my all-time go-to winter cold weather jerkbait when the water is not slick calm. So it could be not slick calm because of wind. It could be not slick calm because obviously you're fishing heavy current. But when that water is ripping or the wind is ripping and there's that nice chop on the water in the wintertime, I will reach for a Rogue. And then if the water is slick calm, if I'm out on the lake and I'm really trying to get those, finicky fish out there to bite, then you go to more of like a finessey, hard stopping, more responsive jerkbait like a 110 style jerkbait. So to me, and some people might disagree here, I think the Rogue is kind of like the bull in the china shop. It's aggressive, it's wide pivoting, this wide wobbling, not real good at, again, going like 90 degrees, bam, 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 right? It's just kind of like, woof, 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 I guess, if I could like describe it in a sound, I guess. But you guys probably know what I mean, right? It is not just this tactical, tight quarters movement. It's kind of the opposite. But that makes this jerkbait good at standing out when others don't. So in the winter, when the weather does call for a jerkbait and not some constantly moving reaction strike bait, but a bait like a jerkbait that calls attention to itself, then pauses for those fish so they don't have to chase as hard, then factor in moving water. So I want smallmouth or largemouth or whatever to get a good look at this bait when it's in the strike zone, because in current, it might only be in the strike zone for a few seconds. That fish is not going to miss or not going to not see a Rogue. A Rogue gets seen. The light refraction off that shiny textured body, the wide wobble, the amount of water and force that you can feel from this bait when you work it, this bait gets noticed. So it's like the best of both worlds in that scenario. It's basically, again, I don't know what to call it except like a power jerk bait. When fish aren't getting a super good look at your bait and they only have a few split seconds to react, a Smithwick Rogue is a great option for me and has been for many years. The other situation that I'm going to fish a Rogue a ton is at night. And the same logic here kind of applies. The Smithwick just gets noticed. Full moon, it's so reflective and shimmery that just the light from that moon can be seen from all kinds of ways away, because you have, again, this multi-directional scatter of the light that's coming off the side of that bait. But even with no moon, pitch dark outside, the way the outside of that body is designed, it'll find any tiny little bit of light or glare that it can get and reflect from the surface. And at night, that powerful sweep and pull of that bill wobbling that bait, then pausing it, then giving it kind of some hard kicks and wide turns. It's just a different animal than your stereotypical jerkbait. Call it whatever you want. Call it clunky, call it old school, call it vintage, loud, aggressive, all fair game, I think. But in cold water, especially when there's moving cold water or in the pitch black, I always like to have a Smithwick Rogue in my box. So I think everybody listening to this, if you've never picked up a Rogue or you've never thought about keeping one in your box, I implore you, go out, spend $7.99, try out a Rogue. One, again, you're going to find out it's not a 110. Do not expect this to be some replacement for your Mega Bass or your Jackal or your 6th Sense or whatever. It's in a different class. This is, again, more of a wide wobble, give it pulls, give it tugs. Yes, you can work it like a jerkbait, but you can also work this as almost like a jerkbait crankbait, I guess. I do that in current a lot, where I want this bait to tick off the bottom. This bait ticks and pulls off rock and really deflects and kicks up a bunch of motion down there much better than any other jerkbait that I use in terms of getting down to the bottom. Maybe I'm like right under a dam, or I'm in a fast current seam or something. Maybe the water's like 3 foot deep and I want this thing to get down there. I want it to hit the rocks and kind of draw commotion and get that reaction bite and kind of be, again, a hybrid of like a crankbait and a jerkbait. That's another great way to use the Smithwick Rogue. So I think if you've never used one, just try one. They're versatile. They're a really cool old school bait for $7.99 that I do think plays a role in most people's tackle boxes, especially if you live in the Midwest. So there you go, a little bit of overdue love for the Smithwick Rattlin' Rogue. All right, and finally here, we're going to get to the mailbag. We're going to crack it open here in a second, but first, we are brought to you in part by RTIC Coolers. It's fall, it's almost getting into wintertime at this point, but hunting, fishing, tailgating, kids' soccer games, football games, they're all still in full swing. They all require a good cooler, and gone are the days where you have to pay $600, $700, $800. These cooler prices these days are insane. You don't have to pay those anymore. You can go to someone like RTIC Coolers, and you can get the same performance at half the price or less than the other guys. RTIC coolers are built to last with a rugged exterior, lightweight construction, first-class insulation. They hold ice for multiple days at a time, all in a cooler that working folks like you and I can actually afford. So I have their hard coolers, I have a soft cooler, I have a ton of mugs, I have bottles. Everything that I've ever got from RTIC has been first class. I've bought RTIC gear well before they were a partner on the show, and I will continue to buy RTIC gear well after, because I just think they're the best coolers, the best mugs, the best drinkware that I've ever used at the price. So you can go over and you can get your own RTIC coolers or your own own drinkware by heading over to www.rticoutdoors.com. Check out all the new gear they've launched over the past couple weeks. New coolers, new tumblers, new totes. They have something for everybody over at www.rticoutdoors.com. Keep the adventure going with RTIC. All right, let's get to a few mailbag questions here for the final portion of the show. The first mailbag question is from Mark, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, I had a question while I was watching some fishing videos and having recently just listened to your Shimano reel review. You were talking about the Shimano reel having a light spool that made it good for light lure casting. Say if someone doesn't want to necessarily drop the extra cash to get a reel to throw lighter lures, can they compensate with a lighter rod built to throw light 1/32 ounce or 1/16 ounce lures to help with loading the rod to create better momentum on a reel that has trouble casting lighter lures? Thanks as always, and keep up the great work on the podcast. Tight lines, my man, Mark." So the answer to your specific question, I think, is no, but I think you have the right thought process. So casting a really light or micro lure takes two pieces of gear. It takes the right rod, and then it takes a reel that will at least tolerate it. And you described picking the right rod. I don't even think you're describing like overcompensating. I just think you're talking about picking the right rod. If you're going to throw light lures like 1/16 or 1/32 ounce lures, then you should probably get a rod that's rated for that can, like you said, load up and really kind of whip those baits out there. I mean, try casting like a rooster tail with a frog rod. It's not going to be a lot of fun. You do need to match the rod with the lures that you're trying to throw on it. But if you have a reel that isn't set up right or isn't equipped to throw that light of a lure, then you can get the whippiest rod in the world, and that reel is still going to give you headaches because the rod will help you launch the lure, but once the lure is airborne, now the reel is in control of the line. The rod is done. The rod's done its work. It's completely out of the equation now. So until the lure leaves the rod, you're right, that flimsier rod will help. But then it's the reel's job to give that lure enough line that it needs to go to the furthest distance possible. And that reel spool might just be too heavy, or you might have the wrong line on it. You might have your brakes too tight. You might have your brakes too loose. If you have your brakes too loose, it's bird nest city. If you have your brakes too tight or the wrong line or too heavy of a spool or a rod or whatever, it's not going to go as far. So most of the things in this equation are going to cause your lure to not go as far. The only thing, you could try and overcompensate by loosening the brakes on your reel. But again, if you have such a light lure, once it leaves your rod and it's in the air, that little lure probably doesn't have enough momentum or inertia, or again, whatever the word is, that fades out really quick with that light lure if you have a reel that's not made for that. That's why the BFS reels are kind of all the rage for these light bait guys, because they've taken out of the equation the part where the reel can't keep up with the lure. So now the reel is paired for the lure. That lighter spool really lets that momentum from that light bait that you caused with your whippy rod to be able to pull out enough line and hard enough that you can still thumb your spool, if that makes sense. So no, I don't think you can overcompensate with a flimsier rod. It'll help you for 30% of the cast, but the other 70%, when that lure's in the air, you're still going to have trouble with that reel if you don't have a reel that can handle that light of a lure. So I hope that makes sense. That's kind of how I look at it. The next question is from Eric, and he said, "Hi, Andrew, I have a couple questions for the mailbag. First off, what do you wear in the kayak in late fall and early spring? Do you wear a wetsuit or a dry suit, and do you have links? Second question, I have an old hand-me-down Lowrance X65 fish finder from the late 90s. How much of an upgrade would the Garmin Striker 4 CV be? I'm still really learning to read graphs and understand more than just depth. Is saving up for side view advised?" Oh, if we go back to the first question, which is what do I do in the late fall and early spring as far as wetsuit or dry suit? I have the wrong answer, but it's the truth. I don't lie to you guys. I don't pretend like I use things or have things that I don't. When I go out, even in the winter, so you said early spring and late fall, you're basically talking cold water is what you're asking about, right? And you probably were nice enough to assume that I'm not going out there when, the temperature outside is 15 degrees and the water is 37. You're wrong. I am still in the kayak all winter long. I'm an idiot. I go out there all winter and we still fish for fish from the kayaks, even when there's ice on the edge of the rivers or the edge of the lakes, if it's pouring rain, that kind of stuff. Rain's a whole different thing. I don't even own a rain suit. That's another confession here, right? I don't own any rain gear. I have a cheap $10 jacket from Walmart, and I just put it on and basically accept that I'm going to get soaked. So again, I'm not the right person probably to ask about this kind of stuff, but you specifically ask about late fall and early spring, so when it's cold out. And you are 100% right. I should own a dry suit. If you're listening to this, buy a dry suit if you're going to be fishing in the wintertime from your kayak. A dry suit is the safe thing to own to make sure that if you fall out or something happens to you, you don't get hypothermia, you don't drown. You should own one if you're going to be out there in cold water. Again, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that I have one, but that is 100% what you should do. What I do, and this is even dumber, but this is the truth, I guess, I wear my waders in my kayak as a substitute for a dry suit in the wintertime. So I wear my normal waders that I wear if I was just going to go out and wade, in late fall or early spring. I just put them on and I go in the kayak. Now, if you're listening to this, I know that sounds like a stupid thing to do because if I fall out, my waders fill with water. If the water's over my head, bad news bears, I'm probably going down. So what I do, I always make sure, as bad as I am about this the rest of the year, I always make sure that I have my inflatable PFD with me and on if I have waders on in the kayak. That is a rule for me. If I have waders on in the kayak and the water is even remotely close to above my head, I put my life jacket on. Because if I fall out, I don't want to be in that situation where water fills up my waders and I just sink to the bottom of 10-foot water, and that's how I go out. That's not going to happen. So I always wear my inflatable PFD. That thing inflates in like half a second if it gets wet, so I will be buoyed right back up to the top of the water, and then I'm just going to have to worry about being cold. So I need to get to warm, dry, quick place and, worrying about the hypothermia part, not the drowning part. But again, I know that I should own a dry suit. I'm sitting here telling you the safe thing to do and the 100% recommended thing to do is buy a dry suit. Now, luckily, and again, I'm not trying to use this as an excuse, but I guess I sort of am. Most of the water I fish in the wintertime with those waders on, with my life jacket on, is not over my head. We fish a lot of 2, 3, 4, 5 foot water. Very, very rarely are we in deep, deep water that if I fell over the kayak, it would actually be over my head, especially in the wintertime. Our water's really low right now. It's the lowest it's ever been, probably since I started fishing around here. So very rarely am I over my head when I'm fishing in the wintertime. I don't fish a lot of lakes in the wintertime in my kayak. A lot of times it's creeks and rivers and stuff like that. So yes, there's current, but it's not over my head. So I'm not as worried about the drown part as I am just making sure, again, I have a life jacket so it keeps me up. So even if there's current, I still have my head up. I'm still okay. I can, get my feet under me and walk back to my kayak. But if you're going to be over your head or if you're going to be out there in dangerous conditions, buy a dry suit for whatever it is, a couple $100, and it saves your life. It will be a great investment. The other question that you had here was about the fish finder. That's a little easier one. So honestly, I would say no. I would say your little hand-me-down, unit that you're using right now, as long as it does, depth and water temp and maybe, marks a little bit of fish, maybe it doesn't really matter. That's about all you're going to get out of the Striker 4 too. You're going to get really accurate depth. You're going to get water temp, and then you are going to get a little bit of a, 2D graph so that you can see where the drop-offs are and stuff like that after you go over them. I'm assuming your Lowrance does that stuff as well. Very basic stuff that a Striker 4 is going to do too. So no, I wouldn't say it's that much of an upgrade. I would say if you want to save up and invest in a new electronic system, I would wait till you get enough money to buy side imaging. Side imaging to me is the best thing that I ever got in terms of electronics. It's way more important to me than 2D and down. It's way more important to me than the evil forward-facing sonar. To me, it's side imaging. Side imaging is the best thing that I have on my kayak, and it's the thing, honestly, my screen that I have on my Garmin now is just up on my side imaging all the time. I don't even have like the split screen anymore where you can see 2D or down or whatever. It doesn't matter. All I look at is side, and that's what helps me more than anything. So until you get to that point, I'd say your little Lowrance is probably going to do just fine. As long as it gives you accurate depth and accurate temp, I think you're probably good for now. The next question is from Bert, and he says, Andrew, I listen to your show often and appreciate the no-nonsense approach to all the Karens out there. Life's too short and... I'm not even going to cut that out. That's funny. Life's too short and far more energy needs to be funneled into being a better angler or fisherman. I currently fish lake, I don't know how to say that word, in California. In 2022, the lake level was at 36%. And then after our first big rainfall, the lake was at 100%. The lake rose over 60 feet in 3 days. Today, the lake is at 90%. How would you fish this lake? All my waypoints are now in deeper water. As I'm writing this and listening to the rebirth of the Fenwick Rods episode with Justin Poe, Justin might get goosebumps at this, but I actually have Merle Haggard's Fenwick fishing rod that was custom made for Merle. I went to high school with Merle's son in Bakersfield, California. That is super cool. The fact that you have Merle Haggard's fishing rod is awesome. I really wish I would have got to see Merle in concert before he passed away, but that is a cool story. I'm sure Justin would love to know that. The other answer to your actual question, you asked, your lake rose by 60 feet in 3 days. I am not the person to ask about that. We call that around here biblical flooding. That is like Book of Genesis stuff. I have never in my life experienced 60 feet difference in terms of a lake level. So I don't know what to tell you there, except what we do around here, obviously at a much smaller scale. When our lakes flood, when our rivers flood, our number one rule around here is to fish things that used to be above water but are now underwater. Bush lines, trees, stumps, because around here, those fish start to push into that flooded timber, that flooded brush, and that seems to be where they kind of go to hide out until the water starts to recede, and then they kind of slip back into wherever they were before. So it's 60 feet difference, though. I don't know what to say because probably there's so much stuff now underwater that was above water before that I wouldn't know where to start. So sorry about that. I don't know what to tell you except maybe build an ark and like start rounding up animals in twos, because 60-foot water difference is way out of my realm. The next question is from Brad, and he says, what kind and size jig heads do you use for the Temu Alabama rig? That's an easy one. I've been using 3/16 ounce for all 5 of the arms. So I have 3 that have hooks on them. Here in Ohio, you can only have 3 hooks. Dumb rule. I wish we could have 5. I want to fish a normal Alabama rig, but that's okay. So 2 of the hooks are either smashed off or have cut off the hook points on them. But that feels right to me with 3/16 all the way around. I would go up to like a 1/4 ounce, I guess, if I was fishing a lot deeper water. But around here, I'm fishing it in like 6 to 8 foot. So 5 arms of 3/16 ounce heads feel great to me. I've just been using my regular Jigmaster sled heads that I use for my swim baits anyway. Just load 5 of them on there and you're good to go. The next question is from Jeremy, and he says, hello, Mr. Hayes. I'm a huge fan of the Tackle Talk podcast and thought I'd take a minute to thank you for the wonderful, fun, and informative fishing show. It really makes my day job tolerable. I've always been a fan of fishing, but only ever went catfishing with my father on the Susquehanna River at night. We fished what I now know were drop shots using chicken livers. My dad passed away suddenly and unexpectedly about a year ago this Saturday from a heart attack. The last thing he did was loan me his fishing rods and gear for a vacation at a lodge. Anyway, this summer I got bit hard by the bass bug. Fishing helped me tremendously deal with the loss of my pops, and I feel it has brought me closer to him. So none of my old man's rods were actually usable for what I want to fish with. In all seriousness, my dad's setups were pretty ridiculous, but he was the type to do things his way, and it was the only way that he knew. I'm talking a wispy 9-foot fly rod with a spinning reel on it, using 6-pound mono using tiny snell knot hooks. He would catch 5 to 10-pound catfish on that rig, and I think he just liked the fight. He was a successful bass guy in his younger days, and I have a 6-pound smallie mounted on the wall to prove it. Anyway, sorry for the backstory. I'm slowly building my rod and reel arsenal and have come up with 3 combos thus far. I'm still figuring out what rods and reels to use for what baits and lures. I'd like to hear what you would pair up and how you would use my gear. My rods are a Dobbin 703 spinning fast spinning rod, a Guggen Go-To 7-foot medium heavy fast casting rod, and a Cabela's 7041 heavy casting rod. My reels are a Daiwa Tatula 7.3, a Shimano Corrado I 201 HG, a Daiwa Exceller 4.9, and a Lew's 2500 spinning reel. What would you do? Thanks, Andrew. Sorry for being long-winded. If you decide to use this for the mailbag, feel free to edit how you see fit. Thanks again, Jeff Metz Jr. from Pennsylvania. Jeff, man, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. It's kind of the beauty of fishing, right? It sounds like it helped you get through it a little bit. I know it didn't make it that much easier, but it gives you something, at least, like you said, to feel a little bit more closer to him and kind of help you get through it. And I think fishing a lot of times is therapy and an escape for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. So I think that's cool that you have the memories and you have his gear, obviously, to remember him with, and the cool stories about how he used that gear, and now trying to give some of it a new life and trying to go out there and kind of make your own memories in fishing. So as far as your rods and your reels go, I would pair up, I'd say that Dobbins 703 spinning rod, I'd obviously pair up with the Lew's 2500 spinning reel. I'd put 10-pound braid on it, optional leader, and that's your all-around spinning rod. And then I'd take that Daiwa Tatula 7-to-1, I'd put that on probably your Guggen 7-foot medium heavy fast, and I'd put anywhere from 14 to 18-pound fluoro on it, and that's your do-everything rod. And then I'd probably take that Cabela's 704 heavy casting rod, I'd put your Corrado I, the 201 HG, and I'd put that on there. That 201 HG should be a 7.4-to-1, I think, if I remember right. So you have a heavy casting rod, a fairly fast reel. I'd put 65-pound braid on that, and that would be your frog, flipping, punching, A-rig rod, like anything super heavy duty. That would be my recommendation. And then the only thing I think you're missing is a cranking rod. And honestly, you could use that Guggen, that Tatula combo in a pinch for crankbaits too. So I think you're pretty set. I hope that helps. All right, the last question here is from Andy, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. Great show. You've helped me ignite my bass fishing passion this year. My 50-minute commute has also been a lot easier listening to your podcast. My question is, when do you fish weightless wacky rigs versus a Ned rig? I mainly fish small 8-foot to 10-foot deep rivers." Okay, so weightless wacky rigs. You specifically said weightless. So I'm throwing that anywhere that's a little snaggier. So around wood, around docks, things like that. I'm throwing that in snaggier, calmer water most of the time. Then for the Ned, I'm going like hard bottom and in the current. I think a Ned just will do better in the current. You can tick it off the bottom a lot easier. That weightless wacky rig's just gonna get blown all over the place. Not to say you can't use the weightless wacky rig if you want to like drift it past, a specific eddy or a specific piece of cover or something, but just working the bottom and kind of going down the current seam there, I'd probably use a Ned for that. Your question gets a lot harder if you sub out weightless wacky rig for weighted wacky rig. So a weighted wacky rig versus a Ned rig, I think, is a lot more of like a dealer's choice. I would say if fish are hugging the bottom and you want to work that bait off the bottom or off rocks or something like that, I still think a Ned is my choice, but I know people that basically sub out a weighted wacky rig for a Ned rig in a lot of situations. My dad is like that. My dad loves a weighted wacky rig, and I've waded with him in the same creek. I've been throwing a Ned, he's been throwing a weighted wacky rig, and he has whooped my tail doing it when we're standing side by side while I was throwing Ned. So I think that's a much closer comparison, weighted wacky rig versus Ned rig. But if you want to go weightless, I would say that's more of like calm water, docks, things like that. All right, folks, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. Go over to the Tackle Talk Podcast website, tackletalkpodcast.com. Submit a mailbag question for your chance to be heard on the show. Shoot me an email if you have any questions, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, on Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.